Okay, you know Napoleon Bonaparte, right? The guy who shook Europe, crowned himself emperor, and basically scared kings out of their thrones? But here's the thing nobody talks about. He had a son. And not just any son. This kid was born to inherit the most powerful empire in the world. The title was already waiting for him, the King of Rome. But here's the shocker. Instead of ruling over millions, Napoleon's son ended up dying young, sick, and forgotten. His entire life was like a cruel joke written by history. And trust me, this isn't some boring textbook tale. This is about a child raised in luxury but trapped in a golden cage, torn away from his father, and forced to grow up under the shadow of an empire that no longer existed. By the end of this video, you'll see why his story is one of the most heartbreaking. In 1811, Paris exploded with celebration. Cannons fired across the city, bells rang for hours, and people filled the streets cheering. Why? Because the Emperor of France, Napoleon Bonaparte, finally had what he always wanted, an heir. This wasn't just any royal baby. His name was Napoleon Francois Charles Joseph Bonaparte, and from the moment he was born, he carried the weight of an empire on his tiny shoulders. The French gave him a grand title, the King of Rome. Think about that for a second. A baby, already declared king of one of the most powerful cities in the world. His mother? Marie-Louise of Austria, the daughter of the Austrian emperor. That marriage itself was political genius. Napoleon, a man who had fought Austria on the battlefield, now tied himself directly into one of Europe's oldest and most powerful dynasties. It was his way of saying, my family isn't just a French dynasty. We're part of Europe's royal bloodline now. For Napoleon, this child wasn't just a son. He was the living symbol of a dream, the start of a Bonaparte dynasty that would rule for centuries. Imagine the hope that hung in the air. An empire at its peak, a proud father finally securing his legacy, and a nation that believed this boy was their future. But here's the thing about history. Glory never lasts forever. Only a few years after his son's birth, Napoleon's empire started to crumble. By 1814, after years of war, alliances, and betrayals, Europe finally turned on him. Armies marched into Paris, and the man who once ruled almost the entire continent was forced to abdicate his throne. At first, Napoleon was sent to the island of Elba, and in a twist only history could write, he escaped, returned to France, raised an army, and fought one last time. That final stand, the Battle of Waterloo in 1815, he lost, and this time, there would be no comeback. He was shipped off to the remote island of St. Helena, far away in the South Atlantic, a prison surrounded by water. He would never see his son again. Meanwhile, what happened to the boy? Napoleon's wife, Marie-Louise, didn't follow her husband into exile. Instead, she went back to her family in Austria, taking young Napoleon with her. But here's the twist. In Austria, he wasn't treated like the heir to the French throne. The Austrians stripped him of his French identity, gave him a new title, the Duke of Reichstadt, and raised him as one of their own. Think about how bizarre that is. This boy was born King of Rome, the future of France. But within a few short years, he became a quiet Austrian prince with almost no connection to the land he was supposed to rule. His father wasted away on a lonely island thousands of miles away, while his son was raised in gilded halls that looked nothing like Paris. The separation was final. Napoleon the father and Napoleon the son would never stand in the same room again. In Austria, the young boy who had once been celebrated as King of Rome became someone else entirely. He was now known as Franz, the Duke of Reichstadt. On paper, that's a fancy title, but in reality, it was a cage. Franz grew up inside the Austrian royal court, surrounded by polished marble, golden chandeliers, and endless rules. Every move was watched. Every word was measured. The Austrians wanted him quiet, obedient, and above all, not French. His father's name was barely spoken, and when it was with suspicion. But bloodlines don't lie. Even as a child, Franz carried his father's spark. He loved the military. He studied maps, devoured books on strategy, and spent hours sketching battle formations. Visitors described him as intelligent, sharp, and restless. Some even said he looked uncannily like his father. The same piercing eyes, the same serious expression. Yet for all his potential, he was constantly reminded of what he wasn't allowed to be. To the Austrian court, he was their prince, not Napoleon's son. They gave him a carefully curated education, steering him toward a safe, controlled life. No leading armies, no reclaiming thrones, just a nobleman in the shadows. And still, outside of Austria, people hadn't forgotten him. In France, Bonapartists whispered his name. They called him the Eaglet, a nod to Napoleon, who had been called the Eagle. To them, Franz wasn't just a boy in exile. He was hope, the living symbol of an empire they dreamed might rise again. Imagine the pressure of that, raised in luxury, but never free. Beloved in theory, but isolated in reality. A young man torn between two worlds. The destiny he was born into, and the life he was forced to live. But behind the polished image of the Duke of Reichstadt, something was always wrong. Franz was frail. He had struggled with poor health since childhood. Weak lungs, constant fevers, a body that never matched the sharpness of his mind. And as he grew older, that weakness only deepened. But history has a strange way of circling back. In 1940, Adolf Hitler, obsessed with symbols of power, ordered Franz's remains moved from Austria to Paris. There, he was placed in Les Invalides, the same grand tomb where Napoleon himself rests. Father and son, finally reunited in death after being separated for an entire lifetime. It's poetic, almost haunting. The son who never ruled, now lying beside the father who once ruled the world. A dynasty that never truly began, but still captures our imagination centuries later. Franz's story is more than just a forgotten royal biography. It's a reminder that history isn't only about battles and empires. It's also about the human cost hidden behind them. A boy born into destiny, stripped of his identity, and consumed by illness before he could leave his mark. Napoleon dreamed of building an empire that would last for generations. But in the end, his legacy lived on not through his bloodline, but through the story of ambition, power, and the cruel way history rewrites even the brightest hopes. And maybe that's why we still talk about the son of Napoleon today, not as a king, but as a symbol of what could have been.